welcome to the Virtual Vaping Summit. My name is Elise Nichols. I'm the Speak coordinator. And so today this presentation is brought to you by Speak. We're a local coalition working together to try to prevent youth substance use.
Welcome. My name is Patrick Patterson. I'm the Executive Director of the Blue Water Recovery and Outreach Center. It's an honor to be a co-moderator for the Speak Coalition and the Speak Vaping Summit. When we leave today, we want to have a better understanding on teen vaping in our community and a couple best practices on what we can do to help reduce teen vaping in our community.
All right, and now I'm going to have our esteemed panelists introduce themselves.
All right, my name is Allie Cook, and I am a health educator for the St. Clair County Health Department. So I go into schools and I teach evidence-based programs, and mostly they focus on substance use prevention.
My name is Cassandra Alexander. I'm a registered nurse with the St. Clair County Health Department Teen Health. I provide clinical services in our primary care practice for any child ages 10 through 21, and I also do some health programming in the schools and other agencies around the county.
Hi, I'm Jason Steyer. I'm principal at Riverview East High School with the East China School District, and I work with at-risk youth and help provide them with a safe and healthy learning environment.
Hi, I'm Sarah Murray. I am a prevention specialist at Impact. I have some experience in vaping, so I'm here to hopefully shed some light on that. And I also teach the first phase of substance use treatment in the jail.
Great. All right, so now my colleague Allie is going to discuss a little bit about what's happening in St. Clair County in terms of youth vaping.
All right. So the fact that vaping has increased among teens is not a surprise to anybody. We've seen it all over the place. I drove by a high school last year right when school got out, and I saw so many kids leave the parking lot instantly getting their fix from their electronic cigarettes. So it's everywhere. It's getting bigger. But we do have some interesting survey results that the students did this past year. So every other year, the students do a MiPHY survey, and it asks them a whole bunch of questions, and we're going to really focus on their substance use, especially vaping. So the number one substance use used by high schoolers is vaping. 24.2% of high schools reported previous 30-day past use. And right underneath that is alcohol, and then underneath that is marijuana. So I said 24.2% of high schoolers vape. That's actually an increase from last year, or 2018. That number was 31.9%. So it's actually gone down quite a bit, which is really, really good. 2018 seemed to be the year that vaping just really exploded. And we're pretty comparable to Michigan high school students numbers as well. They're at about a 20% high schools in Michigan, Michigan students vape, and then, like I said, 24.2% of St. Clair County high school students vape. And the older the students get, the higher those numbers, higher that number gets. So 7th graders this past year, about 6.7 reported past year use, and then in 9th grade, about 20.9% of them reported past year use, and then as 11th graders, about 30% of 11th graders reported that they had vaped in the past year. And you know, as you get older, you have more freedom, more friends, you can drive, so it just makes sense that that number goes up. So we're just really trying to work as a county to reduce those numbers because we want to have a healthy community with healthy teens.
Right. So I guess we'll start off our panel discussion. I'm going to throw this question to you, Allie. Can you tell us, so you're in the schools, can you tell us the response from kids when you come in with these prevention programs?
Yeah, so I go into schools all over the county. I actually deliver vaping presentations. The students love to hear that. I do get mixed receptions. Sometimes students have no experience with the drugs that I'm talking about, and sometimes students have a little bit more experience. But generally, they're really open to the information. A lot of times, especially as a teenager, you get into things that you don't really know all the information about. And so I think that's a big part of why vaping has become so huge. But no, I mean, I get a pretty good reception. I mean, I've learned quite a bit myself too. I mean, I was talking to some 7th graders. That's about 12 years old who had already were addicted to nicotine. And I asked, you know, as a 12-year-old, how do you get this product? Because I'm sure your parents aren't giving it to you. And their reaction was, oh, my cousins gave it to me. They told me to try it. They told me to try it. And now it hurts to stop. So it's really hard to see a child already have a substance use problem, because we know that when your brain is developing and you bring in a substance to it, it just really changes the structure of your brain. But it can also increase the chance of developing further substance use disorders. So it's just really interesting. I learn probably more than they learn when I go into schools.
Cassandra, can you talk a little bit more in depth on what you do at the health department with teen health and your perspective on teen vaping?
Sure. So, as I mentioned earlier, I split my time between working in the clinic and actually providing clinical services, nursing services. And so that would include preventive health and primary health visits. So it's not unusual for us to have clients who come in who vape as young as 10, 11 years old, and then up, of course, and we see a much broader increase as we get up into the 18, 19, and early 20s. And then in addition to going in and actually working in the clinics, I do go in the schools and provide preventive health programming. So I get a different perspective from the medical clinical side, and then also from the preventive health programming. And what I've noticed is that when they come into the clinic, we assess the smoking status for all of our patients. It's very similar to if you go to your doctor and they say, are you a smoker? Have you ever smoked in the past? Because it's really relevant to your health and your health care. And we've noticed a really sharp increase in the number of people who say, no, I do not smoke, but yes, I do vape. And as we go into the schools and discuss some of the other preventive programming that we do as it relates to suicide prevention and depression, things like vaping and substance use actually filter into those conversations a lot as well. So I'm seeing that it really is pretty ubiquitous. It seems like it's a problem throughout every school and everywhere in the county at every building level, junior high, high school, and then up from there as well.
All right. Jason, you are our principal on the panel, so you've dealt a lot with maybe more the disciplinary part of vaping in the schools. Can you talk a little bit about that and just generally what you've been seeing with your students?
Sure, absolutely. So as Allie mentioned, 2018 was really the peak. We saw a spike in student vaping in the schools. It was happening in the bathrooms. It was reported on the buses on a regular basis. Students were doing it in class. So it did become a discipline issue, or it could have become a discipline issue. But we took it as an opportunity to inform, to bring in groups like the health department, to talk about it in a realistic way, so that the students knew that it was harmful and that we weren't just out to get them. Because again, I spent the majority of my day policing the bathroom, trying to catch the kids who were doing it. So again, we tried to take a more holistic approach to it so that students understood why we were so concerned about it.
Great.
Sarah, can you give us your perspective on teen vaping?
So I used to do a teens at risk group at my agency, and something that I noticed was it's the smells of the fruits, the baked goods that was really appealing to them. Or they see their parents doing it, so they think it's okay for them to do it. For myself, it was the smells, the taste, the mint, whatever it was, something that just didn't smell like an ashtray.
Yeah. That
That was like, this is great, but you don't realize the harm you're doing because you're not getting that toxicity, can't say it, of it. But yeah.
So Sarah, you've talked a little bit about past use of vaping products. Can you tell us when you started vaping and kind of what the catalyst was for starting?
Yep, I was about 21 when I started. I had smoked on and off in high school, whether it's going to parties, going to local shows. When I turned 18, move out on my own, have all this freedom. You start dating someone that's a smoker, and then you slowly start picking up on it yourself. I wanted to quit smoking because at the time I was a cosmetologist at Paul Mitchell, and no one wants to get their hair done by someone that smells like an ashtray. And then you hear that comment once, and you're like, ooh, I kind of smell bad then. So, it was, we're going to quit. This is what we're going to do. It got all the good flavors. So then it was, well, this is easier then, until you realize, you're doing the exact same thing, just in a different form of it.
Yeah. So when did you stop? Can you talk about how long did you vape for? When did you stop? And what made you stop?
I vaped for about a year, and the reason why I stopped was I started having health issues. My throat started hurting a lot more. I noticed I was clearing my throat as if there was always something stuck in it. I go to bed at night, wake up, and I just felt like I had extra drainage, like I was almost like choking and drowning myself in a way. And then my throat would just hurt. And then within that year, I got tonsillitis 3 times. And it was my first time ever getting tonsillitis. So then it kind of was like, well, I wonder if this is contributing, to the point where after I even quit, I had to get my tonsils removed because they just kept coming back and going away, coming back, going away. And then when I quit, I just had to decide, look at the big picture. You're still using nicotine, it's just a different form. So whether you go back to smoking or you smoke the vape, you just need to be done. So
Okay.
I had to just cut off cold turkey, which was hard, but in the long run, it worked out.
Yeah.
I know we have some structured questions, and we're going to ask the panel and get into more of a discussion between each other. But earlier today, I asked a group of people, why do you vape? And the response was because it fulfills my nicotine craving and it doesn't smell. What are your thoughts on that?
That's pretty close to what I've in my experience, what I've heard when I've asked our clients what is it that they like about vaping? What has compelled them to want to use it, and that's just spot on. It's got this, they call it their nic buzz. It's that sort of intoxicated feeling that they get when they first get that nicotine in their bloodstream. And then the fact that it doesn't smell. I mean, the ability to conceal and vape discreetly is probably one of the most compelling factors in adolescent vaping. If you can imagine, they can vape in class, they can vape in the bathroom, they can vape at the dinner table. If you can try to imagine someone trying to light up a cigarette in the back of the classroom or at the dinner table without getting noticed, it would be virtually impossible. So they're able to do it so discreetly, and I think that's just an absolute major factor in why they choose to use it.
And there were national studies done, and 97% of teens who vape say it's the flavors.
Yeah.
And not even just the flavors, but these vaping companies used such predatory marketing tactics, and they just took it page by page from the tobacco industry. They paid social media influencers money to hawk these products online. They're sleek. They're easily hid. They have all these flavors. They're cheap. You can find them anywhere. And a lot of the times too, when you ask kids, do you want to be a smoker? No, I'm just doing this right now. This is just a right now thing. But in their brain, they're not realizing that right now thing generally turns to a long-term thing when addiction takes place.
Sure.
So for a lot of teens, it's just, I just do it on weekends with my friends. It's just like I'm never going to buy my own, but it snowballs out of control. And so I think a lot of people that start, whether it's cigarettes, vaping, or any drug, it's not they don't wake up and want to be addicted to a substance. It just happens all of a sudden. And so I think the main contributing factor are the flavors and the fact that there was so much misinformation sent out by the vaping industry, and then the predatory marketing tactics that they used. I think those just combined just made this whole epidemic explode.
Yeah. All right. I just want to remind people at home that you can drop your questions into our comment box, and we can ask our panelists live here if you have any questions. But we do have another question. I know, Jason, you brought a bag of confiscated vapes.
Right. Yeah.
If you could just tell us a little bit about that. I mean, how many, I know you said 2018, it kind of exploded. How many do you confiscate? I know they can be hid. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, they come in all varieties. The most common look very similar to a USB or a thumb drive, so it can be mistaken by parents or anyone who sees it. It can be easily hidden in the sleeve, which we found was being used in classes, or in the hole where the drawstring goes into a hoodie. Other ones look more like chargers or pens. We did find that some students were using THC products in them as well, so they're versatile in terms of what they can be used for. So shape, size, obviously some antiquated ones that look more like a flip phone. We were talking about ones that look identical to a stick of lipstick.
Oh, wow.
So they're getting creative in how they design them. They're easily available. You know, kids are often trading or selling them. We hear our high school students getting them from younger students, from local party stores that shouldn't be selling them. Perhaps the scariest part for me is most of the actual vape juice that I've confiscated isn't even labeled. So the idea that they're putting any sort of chemical and smoking it without any knowledge of what they're actually smoking is actually very concerning. So again, a huge variety, easy to hide, but most of the time they're pretty upfront. Once you catch them, they're going to hand it over. But I've had parents call afterwards and say, you know, I want my child's vape back, because they don't want to go out and purchase another one for them or for whatever reason. But often the parents advocate the use of them and actually fight the idea that they were confiscated and don't feel that that was fair.
So what do you say to that? I'm going to be the devil's advocate and be the parent.
Right. Well, we were talking about the argument that marijuana is legal, tobacco is legal. Well, these are 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. There are rules at a school, so there are laws and rules that they're breaking. So they have to be clear that, you know, that's not acceptable, especially for the mission that we have at school is to keep these kids safe and healthy, and they have to understand that. So sometimes it's the conversation with the parents to understand that we're trying to help your child. We're not out to get them. We're not out to suspend them. We're here to help them make good decisions.
And just because something's legal doesn't mean it's safe. I think that causes, that just adds to the misinformation. You know, especially when marijuana became legalized, it doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. It doesn't mean it's all of a sudden a safe, healthy thing. Vaping is not a safe, healthy thing. And, you know, and so sometimes people are weighing the risks and benefits. Well, it's better than smoking. Well, is it for a 15-year-old? No, it's not. And it's not FDA approved to be a tobacco cessation tool either. So I just think a lot, like you said, a lot of misinformation. And parents mean well, too. It's not like parents would never want to hurt their kid or do that unwillingly. And so I think that the more we know about something, the better choices we can make. And so that's why it's so important to be able to spread this information so more people get the correct information.
Yeah. So Cassandra, could you talk us through a little bit more about what the risks are health-wise for teens who are vaping?
So what's interesting about vaping is that because this is a relatively new technology, new phenomenon, we actually don't have a lot of really good empirical data about the long-term effects of vaping specifically. But we do know a lot about nicotine. Nicotine has been around for a really long time, and that's the most common substance that is used in vaping. In the short term, nicotine acts as what we call a vasoconstrictor. So it squeezes the blood vessels in the body tight, makes it more difficult for the heart to pump oxygenated blood through the body. So blood pressure increases, heart rate increases. And that's actually has a lot to do with that so-called nic buzz, because you're suddenly causing a very tight squeezing of the blood vessels, and that temporarily actually constricts blood flow to the brain. So that's a little bit of a dizziness caused by a lack of oxygen. We also know that over time that puts a lot of strain on your heart, as it has to beat a lot harder in order to pump blood through the body. And there's a lot of concern about the actual content of the vapor that is coming out of the products being brought into the lungs. The only thing, and we say this all the time, and I'm sure you'll hear it somewhere else too, the only thing that the lungs should be breathing in is fresh, clean air. Really, nothing else should ever be brought into our lungs. And there are a lot of particulates and lipids that are contained within these vapor clouds. And when they get into the lungs, they can sort of clog up those really tiny, small passages and airways, and they prevent the ability of the lung cells to exchange carbon dioxide and oxygen and vice versa, and that can lead to a decrease in the available oxygen in the bloodstream. And that, of course, over time can be immediately and over time can be very dangerous. We saw the consequences of that last summer when there were so many cases of vaping sickness, which actually had a number of young people on ventilators, some of which died from those sicknesses. And we still don't entirely understand what exactly it was that caused that to happen in those kids. And so it's very possible that we could see those types of sicknesses again. And we also have to talk about the effect that it has on epithelial tissue in the throat and the lungs. That would be related to the tonsillitis and things. And we don't know that there's a direct link, but it makes sense when you think about how these chemicals work in the body. And then there's always the incidental exposure to the liquid itself. If it gets into the eyes, it can get on the skin and cause injury. And I don't know if anyone's ever seen the videos of the exploding batteries, but personally that frightens me. So there's a lot of consequences, short-term and long-term. And as I always tell our students and our clients, we didn't know that cigarettes cause lung cancer until people who smoked started getting lung cancer. They were the guinea pigs at that time. And so unfortunately, our youth and those who vape now are the test subjects, so to speak.
Yeah. Good.
Pretty good point. Yeah, I can, I don't know where I'm going to go with this, but I can remember when I was 14, I asked my older brother, what's a nicotine buzz like? And he said, let me punch you in the head.
Yeah.
Feels about the same.
Wow.
I'm sure, I don't know if I want to use that.
We have our first question from the live feed. It says, aside from THC and nicotine, what are some other drugs that can be vaped?
Going on this one. So I actually just kind of looked this up today. Really, theoretically, anything could be vaporized. And there's some science that goes into it, and I'm not going to pretend that I know all of it. But basically, if you can get this drug in like a liquid form, or can get it have a solvent in with it, you could vape anything. Alcohol can be vaped. Crack cocaine can be vaped. I mean, people can be very creative when it comes to ways to take drugs. And so really, I mean, anything theoretically could be. And the efficacy of it, or the ability of it to get you high might be different just because of the, dissolving it, the liquid ratio, but truly anything, unfortunately.
Yeah. And so, whoops, we have another question. My family turned to vapes thinking they were safer. What can we do now?
Well, unfortunately, I mean, this is still something that is being studied. There's a lot of research, and in the U.S. and then in other countries like Great Britain and Ireland, there are studies to look at the efficacy of vaping as a smoking cessation tool. So what that means is helping those who are currently smoking traditional cigarettes to phase off of those by vaping. Now, as you mentioned before, you're sort of trading one delivery method for another. The substance of addiction is still going to be the nicotine. The question is, if you are comparing the two directly, which one has more or less health risks? Unfortunately, coming off of nicotine is going to be the same whether you smoke it or vape it. So for somebody who is already using nicotine, whether they're smoking or vaping, that process of withdrawal is going probably to be very uncomfortable. The good news is that primary care providers like us at Teen Health Center, or for an adult, their normal primary care doctor, can absolutely help them through that process. There are a variety of ways of helping to with cessation from smoking or vaping. It's definitely worth speaking to your provider and asking for some help.
And if you even just want to Google tobacco cessation, vaping cessation, there are so many free, readily available resources for adults and for teens. Whether you want to call, chat online, or text, there are so many amazing tobacco, like cigarette or vaping cessation resources that are aimed either at just teens or adults. And so more people are quitting nicotine more, now than ever, and so that's really good because anyone can do it. So there are really a lot of good free resources at your fingertips. Yeah.
Right. I would add to that, just trying to change or alter the cues, because there are certain times, certain places, certain people that when you're around, you tend to do certain things. Yeah. So if you can alter that and ideally replace them with, positive behaviors or, things that are better coping mechanisms. I often have students say that they vape to deal with stress or anxiety or boredom. So if you can redirect and alter and replace with something positive, it doesn't replace the withdrawal, but it certainly helps.
The withdrawal from nicotine is fairly temporary. Most people find that the physical withdrawal symptoms disappear within a week of quitting. It's really the behavioral aspects of addiction from really any substance that tend to linger. And so some of these resources that Allie mentioned, as far as some of these reprogramming, behavioral, cognitive, different types of methods for, like you said, kind of redirecting your attention and kind of redesigning these behaviors that were associated with the addiction in the first place is really the key to quitting and staying quit.
Yeah.
Jason, are there consequences to teens vaping in a high school? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, so typically we try to make it obvious that it's not accepted in schools. So most schools will take an approach of first offense is typically a 2 or 3 day suspension. Second offense would be a 5-day. When you start getting above and beyond 5, then students are in jeopardy of expulsion, removal from programs, and we certainly don't want an unhealthy habit to be the reason for removing a student from school. So as I mentioned, we try to have those conversations, the dialogue, the support groups, to help students overcome that without resorting to the disciplinary actions.
There's vaping support groups?
And we've had in the past years, students form them themselves because they wanted to find ways to overcome it, and often the peers are the ones that can relate the most, that they trust the most, that they can be open and honest with. And part of our school too is about building those relationships between our teachers and our students so that they can come to us when they need help, whether it's with vaping, anything else, any other adversity that they're facing in their life.
I mean, I was alarmed, almost floored when I heard the number in percentage of 9th graders that are vaping. You know, it was, nobody did it. I mean, yeah, sure, people smoked cigarettes, you know, when we were, but anyways, it just seems to be so prevalent in today's world.
Yeah.
I had a surprising number of our clients who have mentioned to me that they would never smoke, but they would certainly vape. So so it seems like this epidemic is catching an entirely new group of kids who I would never touch a cigarette, but they've taken up the habit of vaping. So I think that's partly why it seems to have just taken on such a...
Well, and the perception of risk is super low. Same with marijuana.
Yeah.
I go into and I teach programs and I say, okay, you know, the kids say, I would never do drugs. I don't do drugs. I do smoke marijuana though.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's a drug. And so it's kind of the same, there's a low perception of risk. Again, marijuana is legal, so there's a perception that it's a safe, okay thing to do. And then same with vaping. You know, in the beginning, a lot of these companies said that we don't have nicotine in our products. It's just flavoring and vapor. And first of all, it's an aerosol, it's not a vapor.
Correct.
And so it's not just harmless water vapor. There are tons of really fine, like heavy metal particles in there that can get and really exacerbate and damage your lungs. But also, a lot of these vapes were not really regulated, so the label could frankly say whatever it wanted. And so a lot of young, unfortunately, kids took that at face value, and they had no idea they were all of a sudden addicted to nicotine 2 weeks later. And so there's just a lot of misinformation that really needs to be corrected.
We have a couple more questions.
Yeah, we do have a couple more questions. I just want to remind people who are watching live, you can put your questions in the comment section. But we did have a question come through, and it just pretty much asks, a lot of kids have this mentality, it'll never happen to me, I won't be addicted, and then, you know, they become addicted. So what can parents do to address this with their own students?
Again, it's an open and honest conversation. I think often parents, and I'm one myself, we try to avoid uncomfortable situations. But sometimes that's going to help someone and sometimes save someone's life if you can have those uncomfortable conversations, especially at a young age. And we're discovering that it's never too young to have those conversations and to inform our kids of what's good and what's bad and what habits to form early on.
Wow.
I think also being a good role model.
Yeah.
You know, kids pick up really quickly on what their immediate and extended family is doing, and sometimes when kids see what their family is doing, they think that's the norm, and they think everyone's doing that.
Yeah.
And sometimes when there's a norm of a thing, we think that it's okay for everyone to do because everyone's doing it, so it's not a big deal. If everyone's doing it, it's not a big deal. And so I think also we need to be wary of that moving forward. Certainly.
Yeah.
Another question is, what can we do as a community to help reduce our youth vaping rates? Advocate for policy change, environmental changes, and other ways, etc. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I do think, and I have to admit that I don't know how this would be done, but I do think we should be ensuring that some of our local businesses are really being responsible in their sales, that they're limiting their sales to people of legal age. I can't tell you how many people I have asked and talked to, minors under the age of 18 who have said that they have purchased their vaping devices themselves in person at various party stores or vaping supply stores, and they may have signs posted saying they don't sell to underage, but the stories coming in are telling us something different. So I don't know if there should be more regulation or policing of those underage sales, but it seems like it's really prevalent.
Yeah. We had another question that came in that Allie might be able to speak to. Are vaping products FDA regulated?
Oh, man. So I think, I don't want to...
Kind of.
Yeah, I think they sort of are. That's like, the thing with vaping is there are new products almost every single day. So for example, we know that the flavor ban was enacted in February, but that only covers closed systems, so things that you can refill or recharge, like Juul or Mod systems. Disposable e-cigarettes, you use them, they have up to 200 puffs, and then you throw them away. There's no flavor ban on that. And so teens have actually shifted. The new thing with teens and vaping is disposables. They're cheap, easy access, you use them and you toss them. And so... I don't even know where I was going with this question. What was the question?
Regulation.
The regulation.
Oh, regulation, sorry. So one of the disposable brands, really popular, was called Puff Bar. It came in all these flavors. One was called OMG, orange, mango, guava, really popular. No one has any idea who owns this business. No one knows where it's from. The building that said like where it was from was in some like abandoned district in Los Angeles. So it was, and they weren't even allowed legally to sell in America, but they were. And so finally the FDA shut that down, but you can still get puff bars through third-party vendors. So FDA tried to keep up, but things just pop up every single day, and it's so hard, all the politics and like red tape, and it's just incredibly hard to keep up with it.
Yeah.
So it's disappointing, but that's the reality.
Yeah, Governor Whitmer had tried to issue an executive order somewhat similar to the ones we've seen, very familiar with now because of COVID, to ban the flavors in Michigan. And this was a very bold move on her part. It was pretty unprecedented in the U.S. and it attracted a lot of national news, and it ended up being overturned. There is a lot of pushback to regulating, primarily from the adults who vape, and quite frankly, it's a little bit of a different story when we're talking about adults. And so a lot of the measures to try and regulate vaping really are meant to protect the youth who are vaping as a byproduct of the vaping industry. So it's difficult to regulate when you have two very separate groups using the same product and having very different outcomes.
Yeah.
But again, I know in the beginning of the whole vaping thing, it was used. The vaping company said, no, we just want, like Juul, I'm going to bring Juul into this. They're one of the companies that we all know about. Mm-hmm. They made several very public mistakes. The first was they said we're only targeting to adults, but they completely conflicted that because their main target market was teens, and you could tell because they had like Instagram, Snapchat, social media. They had these really swanky parties in like Miami, New York, where they passed out free samples. They had like DJs, they had snacks and drinks. They wanted this product to be the product that you wanted to take. But yet they said, we'd be so sad if our product got into the hands of teens, but they rely on teens to smoke because they know that teens are the next generation of addicted smokers who will give them millions of dollars. And so it's actually really sad because it's very premeditated. It's not an accident what they're doing. And so I think that's what makes me the most mad is that they're being so sneaky about it. But if you're aware of it and you recognize it, you can really start to see. So they said, oh, this is to help adults stop smoking. This is a great new helping tool. It's actually not regulated by the FDA to be a tobacco cessation tool because we don't know the efficacy of it. Because it does help some adults. Some adults end up just switching back and forth. Some adults do both at the same time. And by both, I mean traditional cigarettes and vaping devices. So it's just all over the place.
Yeah. And Sarah, I wanted to bring you in here. So as someone who in the past had vaped and also used traditional cigarettes, how has that informed your work as a prevention specialist?
So we kind of mentioned like how kids that'll say like it won't happen to me. I can tell you right now, I have inmates that can sit here and tell you that they went down that path too. For me though, it's able to, with vaping being like on the rise and so new, I'm able to at least let my other prevention specialists know what my experience was, so then they can give it to theirs. But it's given me an insight to where like I can be like, hey, I'm human too. I've made mistakes, and just connect with them on another level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jason, I think this question is going to be geared towards you. Have local districts considered mandating prevention programs, intervention in lieu of suspension for those caught vaping?
And I think that's the way most districts want to lean. They don't want to remove students from school for any reason. And it's requiring the outreach from groups like the health department to come to us and offer their services and to work with us. As teachers, especially today, are stretched pretty thin in terms of what they have to get done in a day. So we certainly rely on those collaborations with our community in helping find ways to support our students and parents and inform and educate.
And we actually, at the at Teen Health in Port Huron, we had a relationship with the school resource police officer from the Port Huron Police Department at Port Huron High School. And she was finding that there were just a almost unmanageable number of students who were being caught vaping on the premises. And she understood, having had a relationship with a lot of these students, that these were kids who probably otherwise wouldn't be getting in trouble. And she really understood that a lot of these risks that they were taking, as far as going to school and vaping in the bathroom and risking getting caught, had a lot to do with the fact that they were dependent physically on the nicotine and couldn't get through a school day without their fix. And so we started doing a kind of a relationship where she would refer those students to me or to another provider at Teen Health to provide evidence-based substance abuse cessation. And so we would actually do a one-on-one or in sometimes a small group setting cessation counseling to help them understand some of the beginning steps to quitting and help offer those services to them if they were interested. And it's been quite effective. I mean, we've had a number of kids who have stopped vaping entirely because of that program. And that same sort of setup of counseling in the sessions and the way they're built is based on some really, what we know to be effective in helping people quit smoking. And so we've kind of tailored and tweaked and customized it to help with vaping. And so far, it's been pretty successful.
And Allie, can you talk a little bit about your programs? Because you have programming that's funded by Region 10, and you work out of the health department, and these programs are completely free, and you can go all around the county. Can you talk a little bit about them?
I love my programs. So I can offer a whole bunch of different programs. They're prevention, they're substance use prevention, but also a really important aspect of that is building social emotional intelligence. And that's the stuff that we have within ourselves to help us avoid using drugs in the first place. So positive self-image, good communication skills, assertiveness, healthy relationships, dealing with disappointment, dealing with your emotions. And that all, because a lot of people, I think, that do abuse drugs, it's to feel good, it's to feel better. They don't want to do it, it helps them. And so my programs go into schools, and I teach students ways to build their self-image and their self-worth. But then I also educate on these substances, primarily alcohol, tobacco, marijuana. And so we learn about the realities of it. Because again, a lot of misinformation out there because the kids are getting information either from the internet or from their friends. So not really credible sources all the time. And so my job is to go in there and relate to the teens and give them it's evidence-based. And so these programs have been tested, they're tried and true, they work. We do pre and post tests to, again, still make sure they are working in this community, and they are. The results really speak for themselves. There's a big increase in knowledge and behavior from the pre-test to the post-test in all the schools I've worked with. So it's really helpful, and the kids really seem to be receptive to that.
Yeah.
If we were having this conversation 2 years from now, what would have to happen between now and then to say we've helped reduce teen vaping in our community?
Good question.
Go
I
ahead.
would say just continue providing opportunities to continue this conversation, to involve teens and children in this conversation. Again, that's often where you find the solutions, is from the people who have the problem or the challenge.
That's right.
So continuing to have these collective conversations, the support, the information out there, but certainly involve the people who are challenged by it.
Yeah.
Are there
Sarah?
support groups for vaping? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
did
no,
I
go
interrupt
ahead.
you? Are there support groups for vaping outside of the school or students? The question came online.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think we should explore, and if not, form one in our own community
That's
so that
right,
people
yeah.
have somewhere to go. Social media is a comfortable place for a lot of people to go. They feel open and uninhibited, and having some conversations that sometimes are difficult in person or with an adult or someone who's in a role of authority. So I think we should certainly create that forum so that people can openly share their experiences.
And again, online, if you go to smokefree.gov and teen.smokefree.gov, those offer wonderful resources for teens and for adults. And literally just Google tobacco or vaping cessation or how to quit vaping, help. And there's just so many resources at your fingertips.
It's helpful.
And and another thing too is like you had said earlier, avoid triggers. A lot of times people, places, and things can make us really want to fall back on our old habits. And I know, Sarah, you had mentioned that as well. And also being aware of what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, and what I could do maybe instead.
Yeah. Sarah, from your perspective, as a prevention specialist, what can we do in the next 5 years to see these numbers decrease?
Change the narrative that it's safe.
Yeah.
That's something I always say, well, it's safer, it's safer. But we've already discussed, it's the exact same thing, you're just doing it in a different delivery. If that would have been presented to me that, hey, you're doing the exact same thing, but you're just doing it from a mod versus a cigarette, I probably wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
And then for company-wise, the advertisements of it, they glorify it, make it look so beautiful. It's kind of like when you go to the grocery store and the liquor bottles all different colors, you're like, that's so pretty.
Yeah.
But then
Especially
it's
if you're
bad.
adolescent.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially
Right.
if you're a kid.
Yeah, for a child. And then, so the vape in general, just when you go into vape stores, when I was first finding out about it, it was painted as this picture of this glorious thing, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, can't wait. And then a year later, I'm like, kill me.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have another question that came in. It's more of a medical question. Is e-cig/vaping associated lung injury still a concern for people who vape, or has this declined?
Oh, it has declined. There did seem to be. Is it still a concern? You bet. It's absolutely a concern. It's unfortunately something that is almost impossible to predict in terms of who it's going to affect and when. And that was something that we saw last summer when we saw these vaping-associated lung injuries. Was you had somebody who was otherwise very healthy and had no underlying medical conditions suddenly becoming critically ill and oftentimes on a ventilator. So we don't know, we still do not know what caused that, that cluster of lung injuries last summer. It is in fact, it's likely that some of the offending substances are still in the vaping products that are being used today. We have some idea that there may have been a very particular substance, a vitamin E acetate, that was included in some of the kind of bootlegged versions of the THC liquids. And that seems to be kind of the going theory, is that that was where a lot of it originated. But there were a number of people, and this is something that I think is important to tell our kids, is that there were a number of people who were victims of this lung injury, this vaping sickness, so-called, that did not use THC-containing substances. And many of them used commercially prepared vaping liquids, the same stuff that is on the shelves today. Who it's going to affect, when, and how severely is really impossible to know. This is a new phenomenon. We have no empiric data. We don't know how it's going to affect people in the long term. So as far as that still being a concern, absolutely it is.
And I kind of want to bring COVID into this, not to be that person. But scientists do know that smoking and vaping does weaken your lungs, making it more susceptible to catch illnesses. And COVID's an illness. And so there's, they're finding connections between the susceptibility of catching, COVID and how sick you get from it. Smoking it weakens your immune system, and so you're just, it weakens your heart, your lungs. So it's just is easier for bacteria and viruses to find their way and be a little bit more damaging.
Yeah, one of the questions that we routinely ask when we are doing investigations for COVID at the health department is we ask people who are infected with COVID whether they have or have ever vaped in the past. This is a standardized question. Vaping, we don't know exactly the mechanism of how it affects your outcome with COVID, but we do know that there is a link with severity of disease, and one of the theories is that inflammatory effect. We know that COVID is an inflammatory response illness, and the vaping causes an inflammatory response in the lungs, and so it's very likely that vaping would exacerbate a COVID infection.
Mm-hmm. Let's play a scenario. Okay. I'm a parent, my kid's vaping. Kid says, Mom, Dad, what's the big deal? It's vaping.
Yeah.
How do I talk to my child about vaping?
Good question.
Jason, do you have an answer as our principal?
Just open and honestly, I'll go back to that.
Yeah.
You have to be realistic about it. If you have life experiences that you can share that relate to it, most certainly. But you can't be on the defense right away and try to punish the kid or tell them it's wrong. You have to convince them that there are better ways to, again, replace those triggers to find healthy habits in your life, things that are going to bring you purpose and meaning in life. So I think it's often that you kind of resort to things that are comfortable and familiar, whether they're good or bad habits. So you really have to work on building up self-esteem and self-worth and those sorts of things, so that they know that they're harming themselves. You're not necessarily disappointed with them, but you want to help them make good decisions.
Is there any data or studies that show cigarettes and or vaping is a gateway that may lead to, other substance use?
Well, what's interesting is we do know that when an adolescent's brain is exposed to nicotine before the age, particularly before the age of 25, their likelihood of smoking into adulthood is very high, and their likelihood of becoming dependent or addicted to other substances also increases significantly. From birth until about the age of 25, the brain is developing and continuing to grow continuously and at an enormously rapid pace. And when somebody learns a new behavior or a young person forms a new memory, this actually becomes hardwired into the brain. In adults, we can learn new things and we can learn new memories, but we don't have the same what they call plasticity, which is that ability of the brain to actually remold and remodel and shape itself. Those changes become permanent once the brain is fully developed. And nicotine exposure to the brain prior to the age of 25 or so, roughly, actually changes in the way that the brain develops. And even if the nicotine is no longer used after that adulthood age, the effects of it remain permanently in the brain. It sort of primes the brain for addiction, whether it's to nicotine or to other substances. There's also a lot of behaviors that come, especially with nicotine, the cravings and reward system that I'm jonesing for a nicotine fix, and then I reward with that dopamine rush that I get when I get the nicotine. That really sets up those behavior patterns for addiction as well. So I would think that nicotine would really be the gateway drug, more than possibly any other ones.
And studies show it really affects your frontal lobe, and
Right.
that's the part of your brain that really deals with like impulsivity and attention span and memory and emotion. And so a lot of teens, that's like one of the last things to develop, correct?
Correct.
And so that's why
Absolutely.
it hits those teens so hard, is because that part of their brain is so fragile still, and it's still learning. And so every time you smoke, you're creating a clear pathway of that brain to make a connection with that addiction. And so that's why it can happen so quickly with teens, because their brains
Absolutely.
are such a sponge, and they can just take up stuff so quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's actually been studies that have shown that if if a person abstains from nicotine through their entire adolescence up until 25, and then they begin to use nicotine at 25 or older, their likelihood of becoming addicted is actually quite small. And so that's why when these teens say, I'm just going to use it on the weekends, I'm just going to use it with my friends, it's very unlikely that that really will be their reality. They're very likely that that's going to become daily, habitual use because of the way their brains are forming.
And 80 or 90% of adult smokers started before age 18.
Yes.
And then a new study I was reading, truthinitiative.org, is a great resource as well for information on smoking and vaping. They just did a recent study that students who vape and have never smoked are almost 7 times more likely to graduate onto traditional cigarettes. So students who had never smoked but they're vaping, they're more likely to potentially go on to smoke cigarettes. And again, that's not true for everyone, but it's a risk that you shouldn't be willing to take.
Yeah. All right. So we have 2 more questions in the live feed. I know we're running out of time, but Allie, this probably will be for you. A lot of vaping devices are designed to be purposefully concealed. So do you think the FDA would ever regulate a design of the vape?
I don't think they could keep up, frankly.
That's right.
They have one design. It looks just like an Apple Watch. It has the weather on it, the date, the time, and then you just you take it off and then you can inhale with it. You can lipstick. They make highlighters that are vape, inhalers. I always joke because I use an inhaler, and I'm always like, are people thinking that I'm vaping?
Right.
And so again, every day there's a new design. So I just don't think they could keep up with it.
All right. And then let's ask the other question on the feed. And this could be for anybody. So what should a parent look for as far as teens? Because again, it's a sweet smelling substance. Yeah. We might not know if they're using. What are some telltale signs that we could kind of identify?
Well, they make a pretty distinctive noise, and I can maybe demonstrate. It makes it kind of like a kind of noise, and what you're hearing is the battery heating up this liquid and actually causing it to bubble and then turn into a vapor. So you can hear it. It's got a pretty distinct sound to it.
And I would say look out for behavioral changes.
Yeah.
Students who were once doing well in school, a lot of friends, it's changing. That drug is now becoming their friend.
Mm-hmm. And that's true for all substances,
yeah.
right?
Look for changes, in behavior, twitchy, irritable, angry, depressed, quick temper. So behavioral change would be a huge part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jason, did you have anything that you wanted to
Some of the
add?
behavior cues as well, kids with their hoods up or wearing long sleeves when
Sure.
they don't necessarily need long sleeves, or dipping around a corner or into a room where you usually don't spend much time. Those sorts
Frequent
of things.
breaks.
Frequent breaks, yeah.
If you think about a traditional smoker, they take frequent breaks to kind of, like you said, dip out. If you're in the movie and they keep getting up to nobody's going to the movies right now, but get up to go to the bathroom 10, 11 times every 20, 30 minutes, that can be another cue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Sarah, as someone who formerly vaped, again, you didn't start till you're a little bit older, but what, from your personal experience, could adults look for as far as their teens possibly vaping?
Well, when I picked up smoking, I was about 14 or 15. That was about the first time I smoked. But I would never do it at my house. It was when I'd go to someplace else. So to me, it's kind of just paying attention to who your kids are hanging out with and keeping up communication when they're at so-and-so's house. I'll be honest, I used to be like, oh, I'm going here, but then I'd be like over there. So it's really not just trusting the fact that your kid's saying, oh, I'm going to Timmy's house, you know, maybe contact Timmy's parents and be like, you know, are they going to be there this weekend?
Yeah.
So it's really just paying better attention in general, I think, because being someone with experience of it, I would sneak my cigarettes, but never on the property because there's always that, well, what if they see me?
Yeah.
So it was a lot easier to do it outside the home, and then my circle of friends, everyone else did it too, so it was easy to be like, oh, these cigarettes are so-and-so's. So yeah.
Yeah.
One
Jason?
not so obvious one is the styrofoam cup with the straw, because if they're around people and they don't want anyone to see the vape cloud, they'll blow into the straw and
Oh,
drink.
boy.
And
So
it's-
Oh.
Whoa.
Wow.
And there is an odor. There's
Yeah,
definitely
there's
an
certainly a
odor.
fruity odor.
It's generally not an unpleasant odor. Like if you were around someone who was smoking a cigarette, you'll suddenly like sort of walk through the room and you'll feel like you've walked through a cloud of strawberry or vanilla or something sort of fruity and artificial smelling.
I mean, I can smell that bag right now.
Yeah.
It's very
Yeah, we
prominent.
could. Yeah,
And it smells
had
good.
a
I'm not going to lie.
It's not unpleasant at
Yeah.
all, which is the point, right?
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that we did not anticipate the high percentage of teens vaping in our community?
I think so.
If we didn't have the ability to predict that, what is our ability to predict it to go even higher? You know, are we going to see that? My point is, today it's at 20 to 30% of teens vaping. In 2 years, is it going to be up to 50%?
Well, I think, and the data shows it's already decreasing, and I think with more knowledge comes more, you know, I guess responsibility. When you know more, you do better, hopefully. And so I think that just the more we continue to get the information out there, I think we'll just see the results start to happen.
Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts about that question from Pat?
I've even noticed among our clients that there seems to be, I don't know that I've consciously noticed a decrease in the number of clients who are vaping, although I have noticed differences in their responses when I ask them if they vape. And I've noticed more of our clients vehemently denying that they vape, whereas before they would say, no, I don't vape, but now it's no, I definitely don't vape, as though to say, I wouldn't do that, I don't like that, I disapprove of that. And so I do think there are more kids now who are really taking a stance against vaping, personally, and hopefully with their friend group too.
Yeah.
And I do see it more too. And again, students don't want to feel like they're a disappointment. So if they respect you and they've overcome something, they share it with you.
Sure.
And I have had more students come to me saying, I'm still not vaping, I've
That's
given
great.
it up. So that's a great sign.
Yeah. All right, so we're running out of time, but I just want to thank all of our guests, our panelists for coming, and for Pat for coming today. Again, this event was hosted by Speak. We're a local coalition working to prevent youth substance use. If you are interested in becoming a member or just learning more, you can go to scchealth.co. We have a page there. You can go to our Facebook page if you're not already here. Just go to @SDC You can also email us at speak@stclaircounty.org. And we're going to ask you, if you could, we have a link in the comments for a survey. We want to get a read about who's watching, what you think, what we could do in the future for Speak. If you would fill that out for us, we would be very appreciative. But without further ado, thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.